We made it.
We made it. We made it. Hello, friends. We are so excited to continue Dream Week here at Wesley Foundation of Kalamazoo. It has been an amazing week celebrating and commemorating the life and work and also the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We have had a few chapels, and we've also been blessed by some community activists and leaders who are able to share and speak into their work with advocacy as well as equality for all people. And it is my privilege, it is my distinct honor to welcome to our lunch conversation today, Ms. Kama Ty Mitchell. Kama is no stranger to the greater Kalamazoo community as well as the greater West Michigan community and abroad. She is the founder and director of Rooted. Kama is an activist. She is also a doula, and she is Her Highness. And so we want to welcome Kama today as she's going to share with us some of her thoughts around advocacy and her work in the community as it relates to social justice, etc. So Kama, welcome this afternoon, and to all of those who are watching, we're so glad that you are taking time to be a part of these very important conversations. Kama, I would love to open our time with this quote, and it's by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and it says this. His question was this, or his statement was this: life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? And I think that as we can sum up the life and work of Reverend Dr. King, that statement really sums it up. His work was all about other people. And I know that your work is all about other people as well. So would you please tell us more about your work? Tell us why it's important, and we would love to hear more about your experience.
Thanks, Jeremy. I'm happy to be here and talk about a passion point for me in this lifetime. So I was born in 1974 from a Black man and an Italian-Swedish mother. And so from the time I was very young, probably your daughter's age, I noticed the looks, the questions, the wonderment. I'm so pleased that mixed race and biracial children are prevalent now, but in the 70s, it was an anomaly in Michigan, at least. And I just noticed at a very young age the difference. And I noticed the discrimination, and I noticed the prejudice, and I noticed the hate. And so I feel like racial justice has been part of my makeup just by being born in the time and in the place to the people I was born to. And when I was about 15, my parents divorced when I was quite young, so I did a lot of self-exploratory work on self and what that looks like in the world. And they also raised my brother and I as kind of animists, being one with nature and all beings and people, maybe a little colorblind because that's all that they knew. But when I was 15, my father introduced me to Sri Vidya, yogic philosophy of the Tantra Katha lineage. And one of the things that he always, from a young age, from high school, is we are all like one human race. And it was just like a constant. And instead of me leaning into like the spiritual bypassing of that, I started leaning into the nuance of how systems were set up to oppress, how language oppresses, how every institution that was created before, during slavery, and right after was set up to oppress. And so using the tenets of spirituality, the philosophy, and also seeing the reality of the world that we're living in kind of infused in me this for justice, right? Like, it's not fair. That was my mantra as a child. It's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair, whether it was for me or others that I saw having injustice. And so when I started delving deeper into yoga, my yoga teacher, Karina Ann Mirsky, who is here in Kalamazoo and phenomenal, also said, the one lie we've always been told is that we're separate. And it's a lie. It's a lie. Humanity is meant to be interdependent and work together and move as a collective so we can survive and continue to thrive. And so when I started delving into yoga, I also found a few years later African drum and dance. And so I started studying both of these modalities that brought me great interpersonal transformation and liberation based on my life experience. And in both of those settings, I would never, or rarely, I should say, see Black Americans. And that bothered me a lot. I'm not very brown, but I was always the brownest person on the dance floor in Ann Arbor, dancing African dance and taking yoga classes. And so in Southwest Michigan, I noticed that because of the surge up north for the industrial, there's a lot of Black people in this area. We've owned a Black farm in Bangor for 55 years, but the segregation was still so prevalent. When I moved back to Kalamazoo in 2009, I was at a concert and noticed this music that they were playing comes from Black people, and there are no Black people in the crowd. And so this just became something that I was witnessing and observing in our community for years before I decided, with the help of my cousin, that we were going to write this tiny little grant with a fiduciary and offer 6 weeks of African drum and dance and yoga philosophy to women of color. The first week we had one 16-year-old girl from K Central. By week 6, there were 30 women in this small studio space with us from ages 1 year to 80 years old, practicing the ancient art of yoga and practicing the 5,000-year-old history of traditional African drum and dance of the West African culture, which probably is most of our ancestors. And so when I went to report that out with my cousin Heather to United Way, who was establishing those funds, we were convinced to start a nonprofit and continue this work. They felt it was a niche in the community that should be opened up broader, and it would help the youth, it would help Black women feel more empowered. And so these are all the things that people were telling us. And so gathered an advisory board. In the next year, we got our 501c3 status. That was 2015. And here we are almost 6 years later, moving into a operational budget that is creating jobs and creating movement and creating healing in the community.
Emma, it's amazing to hear your story and testimony of the way that you have just grown, and the ways that your work toward advocacy, especially for those women, has led to what you're doing today. Can you talk to us more about, there's something that's really important that you do, and it's actually the way that I got to know you was through your doula work. For those of you that don't know, Kama is an amazing doula. She was actually a part of the birth of my daughter. And I'm just so privileged to know her in that way. She was amazing and just such an amazing help to our family throughout that season. Can you talk more about your work with that, and just tell us more details about it?
Sure. In 2002, I went to the birth of my little cousin, Amadi Rain. And it was my cousin's 4th child, so it was a party, right? This was not new to her. There was a lot of female family, her mother, some aunts, some cousins, and I got to witness a birth firsthand. At the time, I was pregnant with my youngest son, and so just being in the room and seeing this sacred birth, this sacred time, I felt so privileged, and I just kind of tucked it in the back of my head, like, that is cool. I want to experience that more. And I've just held tight to that. I was in the food industry for most of my adult life. It's good money. As a single mom, it worked for my schedule. And at the time when Rooted started to come together, I was working as the deli manager at the People's Food Co-op. And I just realized that this stress and this lifestyle was not for me anymore. And I was like, I'm just going to quit and figure out what my life is, all the while practicing yoga and drum and dance. And when I talked to some of my African master dance teachers about American culture versus West African culture, and what they see and how they move, the thing that always comes into the conversation is how much in Western culture and American culture we segment and fragment out all of our things. There's this lack of holistic living, a lack of holistic way of being, and they just don't comprehend that. And so I just kept thinking about that and having conversations about our culture versus their culture and how collective they are, and how that allows them to be financially free and take care of each other when someone's sick. No child is in foster care in their culture. No child is left behind. And so I started thinking about moving into birth work, and the advisory board that we had gathered around us to start this Rooted were like, well, just add it on into the mission. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, well, yoga and dance is kind of like, okay, but doula work, like birth work. But then I started thinking about my African teachers and how it's all goes together. And the amount of disassociation Americans have, I can only speak to what I know, Americans have from their body is profound comparatively to a lot of other cultures. Even European cultures that have mostly European people have a better sense of their body than the overall average of American. Puritans coming over and wiping this land free of indigenous peoples and bringing Black people over here to enslave them with their Puritan ways kind of set the tone for how we move in even as bodies of culture, and Black people that know the earth and move their body, and Latin people and indigenous people who are so connected. It started to pull away from who we are, our indigenous ways. And so when my mentor, Janice Marsh-Prelsnick, who was a home birth midwife in the community who I was studying with first, so I started as a midwife apprentice at home births. I saw the basic physiological way of being, and I was like, this is beautiful. And I can see why dance and yoga and birth can all go together. You have to know how to breathe to birth a baby. You have to be aware of what your pelvis is doing and your hips, how they're moving, and you have to have some freedom and movement. And so I was like convinced by my mentors and my advisory board and my people that we could just do it all in one organization. It took about 3 or 4 years to convince the community how they all went together. And just this past year, with the revolution that we're having in our state, with the turmoil from COVID and the disparities for Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color is so in our face that now people are like, oh, now we see how it all comes together. All of the awareness around Black maternal mortality, Black infant mortality, how that all goes together. Those disparities go together. And the main thing about Rooted is we want to liberate folks in the internal transformation to know, the quote, be still and know I am God. And to realize that God is not outside of us, he is within us, she, they, whatever you want to call it, language of oppression, to know that you are a piece or made in his eye, and you are a part of the whole collective of what the vision is for humanity. That's what we do at Rooted, through birth, through movement. Know your body, know you have agency, and know that wherever institution you go to that was built on white supremacy tenets, you have autonomy and agency. And so we feel like yoga, African drum and dance, the roots of all these things, the deep roots, not the whitewashed capitalist parts of them, but the deep roots of these things, the deep roots of physiological birth bring empowerment to people. I saw the empowerment in your wife when she birthed Zoe. I saw the empowerment in a lot of my other clients when they had births that didn't go well and then births that went beautiful with a doula. And also we know that the medical industrial complex does not see Black women in the same light as their white counterparts.
Wow. So yes, I agree with you. It's so interesting because as you're talking about the way that walking through this work empowers women and people, I'm thinking about the ways that Rooted offers healing, through art and through birth work programming. And you guys are diverse, you're inclusive, you're doing the work of being anti-racist. What would you say is the important piece to understanding how the trauma of what people of color and BIPOC have walked through and understanding these disparities? As I think about Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s work, he worked for social justice. He worked for racial equality. He worked so that the things that you're doing could be solutions to problems. What do you think are the important pieces of that in our community as we reflect on the events of this week and even the last few weeks in our nation, in our country? We've seen a lot of things that aren't new. The stuff that we've been talking about and the things that have been happening, these moments are not new to our culture. They're not new to people of color. But for those, regardless of color, who work to see social justice and racial equality, what is important for us to know and understand about why this work is important today? I know that's a loaded question,
Yeah,
so break it down as you wish.
let me think about that. You know, when I first started this endeavor, I had some Black elders in the community and some white friends and allies say, you know, because I was adamant about having safe and brave space just for BIPOC people. And they're like, you're kind of like going backwards a little bit. Like we should be focusing on unity and coming together. And I just had this deep sense of knowing that that is not going to be possible until true equity happens. We don't have it. We don't have it for Indigenous people. We don't have it for Latinx people. And we sure don't have it for Black people. There's no equity in all of the institutions and systems yet. So, how do we truly become a diverse, unified nation when there's no equity at the root of all these places? When we talk about redlining and the medical industrial complex and home ownership, I mean, I could go on, you know? And so, what we have to do, or what we should do, is self actualization. Actualize the self, knowing exactly who you are and where you're going, and then start to build um, a collective around you. You know,
Mm,
as we come along, the more of us coming along together with the same path is going to
mm,
make a bigger shift. And
yeah.
that's exactly what Reverend Martin Luther King did. He
Mm,
didn't do any of this work alone.
yeah.
We would not be reading about him or quoting him or celebrating him if
Wow.
he was one person doing this work.
Mm,
He carried his knowing to the people, and they rallied around him.
yeah.
And so I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, it did. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
we have to come together. We have to come
We
together.
have to come together. You know, it's so interesting when you say that, because I think for most of us, and when I say us, I'm including the diaspora of people that work to see social justice become a reality. And as I think about my life and work in ministry and in racial justice, I have been so passionate to understand what is it about the coming together that often stops us from coming together, because we want to promote unity, we want to promote this idea of social justice and racial equality and social equality and all of these things. But at the same time, it seems that as we move toward progression in that way, there's always something that's stopping that progress from going forward. And I think that even in this next season, you know, we have a new presidential administration. There are a lot of different changes that are happening in our society, especially in American society, in our communities. I'm brought back to the idea and thought that Jesus gives us in a Christian context to humble ourselves. And I think that that's a context that we can all glean from, regardless of our background, our faith background. We can all come to the table in humility and say, look, we missed the ball here. We missed it. We have done wrong. We haven't done right. But we want to fix that, and we want to go forward in ways that will be equitable for all people. And I believe that if we can get to a place of humility, then some of the conversations that invite people like you and me to the table will begin to sound different, and they will begin to look different, and legislature will look different, and communities will look different, and activism will look different. One of the things that we were talking about earlier this week was our conversation is always about, well, how diverse are we and how diverse can we make things? And the reality is, we can't get to a place of diversity until we first confront the issues that are in front of us, and we look at equality, and we begin to say, okay, here are the systems that have been at play for generations that have held BIPOC in certain positions where they can't come forward. And these are the ways that we are going to create equitable systems for them to be managed. One of the things that not for them to be managed, but for them to feel like they're a part of the conversation, for them to feel like they're a part of the community. As you look at your work with Rooted, which is amazing, I just have so much respect for what you do and drawing the community together, because it's a way, I often say, outside of good food, the best way to unite people is through music and dance. If you get good sound going, you get good music going, it creates an opportunity and an atmosphere for people to engage in what's happening. And as you have continued your work with Rooted, I guess the question I have for you is, what do you see is the how for us to, I'll use Rooted for example. So you do your work with this enrichment, if you will, of the community and the lives around you. What is the how of putting those same principles on the ground? How do we take those principles and put them on the ground so that our brothers and sisters that aren't BIPOC, so our brothers and sisters who are white and our other brothers and sisters that are learning and longing to change the systems at B, what is the how for us getting there to making this not just a lofty conversation, but actually making it an active part of people's lives?
Mhm. Thank you for asking that. You remember maybe 10 years ago when the rubber bracelets came out and everybody had the WWJD? What would Jesus do?
Started out of Michigan.
Did it really?
Yeah, yeah,
You know that. That's
yeah.
powerful. That's cool. But it brings me back to that. And my grandfather, my amazing mixed race, very much a Black man grandfather, but where I get my green eyes from, had a father that was mostly Irish and a mother that was of African and Native descent. He took all of my dad and all of his siblings to church till they were 12 Baptist, Southern Baptist church. When they were 12, he said, you can make a choice now. You can continue this path with me or you can do something else. And I think every single one of them chose something else. And so my dad has 9 siblings, and there's probably about 6 different pathways of spiritual and religion that we follow, but his siblings follow. So of course, the color across my family, my grandparents birthed a nation. They birthed over, had 10 kids, who had 38 kids, who had 80 some kids, and now we're into the next generation. And if you look at us, you will see all the ways of being that humans could possibly be. When we talk about interracial marriage, different spirituality paths, and also LGBTQIA+, like all the ways a human can be is probably in our family. And I always think about how my understanding, my grandfather's many, many lectures of religion in depth that he studied, my understanding of Jesus was he was definitely looking at every soul that he encountered as his equal. And sometimes I feel like when we lean into dogma or religion, we forget that. We're so caught up in the book or the words or the people that we surround ourselves, we forget about the true message that he was trying to give us. And I just try to think about that all the time. Like when I think about Jesus Christ, I think about how benevolent he was and how he looks at everything on this earth as his equal, and how he was trying to embody his father's way of being and showing people that.
Yeah.
So constantly doing that is all we need to do. Constantly doing that is all we need to do. Everybody is my equal. When I look at you, when I look at an infant, when I look even sometimes at nature, I don't find myself, when you talk about humbling, this is where it starts.
Yeah.
Yes. You're no
Yes.
better because you have a degree, and you're no worse because you've had 3 felonies.
Yeah, that's good.
You're just
That's
straight
good.
benevolent human made in his image, regardless of what the outside world has put in your lap or the path you have laid out, your destiny, your ancestry, all of that really doesn't matter when you start to self-actualize.
Wow.
That's what Jesus did. He spent his whole life self-actualizing and reflecting. So regardless of what you call yourself, how you label yourself, how you identify, how you intersect in this world, self-actualize the true core of you and let all the labels just be as they are. It's like for fun. It's like for fun, right?
Yeah.
I feel like we're here to have fun and love up on each other and take care of Earth. To me, that's what we're supposed to be doing. Whether you look to Jesus Christ or Muhammad or goddesses or nature,
As human beings. Yes.
just have fun and be integral and ethical and treat
Mm,
everybody like they're a part of you. We are not alone.
mm,
We're all
mm.
together in this crazy world. And
Wow.
so I think that when you talk, I keep going back to what you said about humbling. That's the
Mm,
main point. I think you touched it, Jeremy.
mm,
I don't find myself any better than my 18-year-old son. You know what
mm,
I mean?
mm,
All of the wisdom and work I've done does not make me
mm,
more worthy, does not make
mm.
him less worthy. And I
Yeah,
feel that way about all of humanity.
that's good.
Benevolence. Just carry benevolence in your heart and look at yourself and be real with
Wow.
yourself. Hmm.
I'm thinking about your words and just reminded of, as in a Christian context, Jesus' commandment, to love God and to love neighbor as ourself. And I'm thinking about yesterday, the spotlight for me of the inauguration was Amanda Gorman's poem. And I think that what she spoke to speaks to what we are saying here right now. You're so right. We have this human dignity, is what I think you're describing. And we can miss that when we step over into our own pride and cross into this idea that I'm better than, or I am more superior than someone else because they are different or that's not their experience. But that is not how we were crafted or designed as humans. We were made in the image of God, and He designed us to be in fellowship with Him and with each other. It's just like you said, we need each other. We need each other to accomplish this mission in the world. We need each other to see things through. And I believe that in this season, it's time, it's past time for us to stop having these long overdue conversations about change and to actually become the change that we want to see. And I think that that's, like you were describing, the answer to what even Dr. King's dream was. He had a dream and he had a vision for this nation and this country. I wonder sometimes if he were still living, what he would say, what his wisdom to us would be. And as I was thinking about that, I want to read this quote to us by Reverend Dr. King. Excuse me. It was simply this. He said this: "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter." And I believe that if there were some context that we could add to that statement, the things that matter most are honoring God and loving our neighbors as ourselves. Our incarcerated neighbor, our Jewish neighbor, our Muslim neighbor, our LGBTQ plus neighbor, whatever your neighbor is, whatever your background is, our Black neighbor, our white neighbor, this is the call for every human. It's definitely our call if you claim to be a Christian, but even more so as a human being, that is our responsibility and even the mandate for this hour. Kamla, it's been so good to have this conversation with you and to learn more about Rooted. Do you have any closing thoughts or comments for us this afternoon?
Um, just keep loving yourself. Love yourself, regardless of where you are, whatever season of your life you're in. And I'm saying not to you, but everybody out there watching, anyone that watches, love yourself so much that it just ripples out,
Yeah,
because
that's good.
that's the bottom line for all that we're trying to invoke and talk about in this,
That's
have
good.
our conversation is, I think that's the epitome of what Jesus Christ was about. Like,
Mm,
you know,
it's so
and
good.
when you love yourself and you have that what Amanda called that, don't be afraid to shine your light and be bright.
Yes,
That's
yes,
love. That's
yes,
love. When you have that, it just
yes,
ripples out, and
it
then
does.
things start to fall into place, and
Mm,
knowing no comes. And I also just want to add, don't be afraid of silence and quiet,
mm,
because that's when the ancestors and God speak to you.
amen
So
to that.
find some quiet in your daily life and listen and listen. And our ancestors and our God will speak to us for right ways of being and right ways of knowing, to continue this work of demolishing the hierarchy of human value.
Mm,
Mhm.
wow, wow. Those are deep words.
Thanks.
Those are deep words.
Yeah, they're
Friend,
not mine, right?
I hear you. I
I'm
hear
new
you.
under the sun. I'm just saying it a different kind of way and with a
Yeah,
little reflection, but that's point blank.
It was still good though.
Right.
It's still good. Friends, thank you for chiming in with us this afternoon. Thank you for being a part of Dream Week. This is our first one, but I look forward to next year. And also, as we continue in our work here at Wesley and at Rooted, if you want to find out more information about Kama's work in Kalamazoo and her, I was going to say her ministry. It really is a ministry also, but you can find out more information about Rooted just below in the conversation. There's a link there that will take you to their website. Kama, thank you so much, so much for your words and for sharing your heart with us. Just so appreciative of your work in our community, and just really look forward to seeing the ways that Rooted will continue being such a light to Kalamazoo and beyond. Thanks for being with us today, friends. We love you, respect you. God bless you guys. We'll talk to you soon.